Right. So as I was saying when the video cut off, we were looking at just examples of this alternative value for u. And we kind of play this little game of I have a pen and what am I gonna do with in my bag? I'm going to put it in the bag, right? Once there are a lot of pens in my bag gets full, right? If I have I don't know, a button, or if I have, I'm sort of leaning on something, I am pushing on it, right? And then afterwards, if I want to have the opposite movement, pulling on it. We talked about the president before, President Obama, who was President Bush. And then we were going to say that if he's not telling the truth, he is full of bull, right? That's our little joke, right? But then that's a convenient way to sort of remember. Those are probably the most common. There's also sort of Buddhish, we could say cushion. And these are, you can find these on page 25, right? So we see this, by the way, on page 25. There's a sort of a comparison drawn between the long value and this alternative value for u. You might find that interesting. It's a sort of a good idea to go back and forth. Notice I'll sort of go for those pairs. We say pull, pool, full, fool, soot, and observe, beware of the spelling of soot. Sometimes we can, by the way, find this. Notice here with these words we have it with the letter u. Here, notice when I say soot, exception we have. Notice we have oo. Sometimes we have oot. We have soot in foot, right? And sometimes we have ook, like book, look. Okay, so that will be where you will encounter it. So we have soot, right? Like les cendres, and then we have suit, right? Look, Luke. So that's it. That is all we really need to see as far as that alternate value for u is concerned. And now we're going to look at our final, I would say, the final thing we're going to see about consonants is going to be what we call the nasal velar. Isn't that a great name? We're going to look on page 23, but I will also refer to the consonant chart, right? This sort of grid, right? And if you remember, we talked about, there's this famous linguist Jacobson, and how this is sort of the first application of structural linguistics to sort of divide a sound into its phonetic traits, right? So when we have sounds, like when we have like right? Notice we've had that one way to describe right, is to say that notice we talked about the place of formation, and the manner of formation, right? The manner of formation is nasal, right? Okay, which means that, and that's where we have the That means our mouth is closed. Well, if the mouth isn't closed, the air doesn't primarily come out of our mouth, but it comes out of our nose, right? You can't really go If you try doing and holding your nose, you'll see that it doesn't work very well, right? So we have our three nasals, right? Okay. And the difference between the and the if you look on the consonant chart, you can refer to this. I think, what is it, the beginning of the brochure? Just so if you remember, notice that we see that we find that is all the way on the left, right? Which means that it's bilabial, right? It's the same thing as p and b, and b. Your mouth is in the same position, so that's what we call the place of formation. So here we have the nasal bilabial is right? And then notice, if now I'm turning to the consonant chart, it might make this a little bit easier. Now we're going to continue with our second nasal, right, which is known as alveolar. And remember, the alveoles are these little holes above your front teeth, right? They're sort of at the level of your gums, and they kind of tickle, right? And notice we've already seen we've seen two series of alveolars. We've seen the plosive alveolars, I'm sorry. And then we've had the fricative alveolars being the z. And so we're in that same kind of zone. So it's a very populated zone, right? Now we can move there is a nasal alveolar. So t, d, s, n. Your tongue is pretty much in the same place, right? It's in that alveolar zone. Okay. Now notice as we're going from left to right in our consonant chart, right? So we're moving from the front, the bilabial, we're obviously at the front of the mouth. We're moving slightly backward as we move in that alveolar zone, right? And now we're even going further back. We'll notice towards almost, we're not at the glottis, the glottals, we're not in our throat yet, but we're at the back of the mouth and we're in the velar zone, right? And you will notice, by the way, I'm doing it this way because otherwise it's really hard to understand why we always have this ing, the velar nasal, right? Ing, which we have this funky kind of symbol that kind of drags down at the end that you can see, right? Okay, and I think of that being sort of people can talk about this being the velarization of n is alveolar, and you kind of can feel that. Yes, you get tenser, right? You get tenser, and you sort of bring tension towards the back of your throat, right? And you're in the same zone as the k and g. Now what that means, we're in the same place of formation, right? With k, g, and the velarized ng, right? And why is that important? Well, this is something that is referred to as a phonetic assimilation. And think of it being just sort of laziness. You don't want to sort of you don't want to move from one zone from another. I mean, your tongue specifically doesn't like to go all over the place if it doesn't have to, right? So if we have, for example, a word in which an N is followed by either K or G, right? K or G. For example, I could have wink, and I could have, let's say, wing, right? So these only differ by the K and the G, right? Here we notice that we have an N before, in the first case, a K, and an N before a G. So here we have this N before a velar consonant, right? Because we've just looked on the consonant chart. We've ascertained that K and G, these two sounds, right, are velar plosives, right? So here, if we have our we have our nasal, this nasal it's too much work, right? Notice that this is what we call a consonant cluster. These two consonants, right, are adjacent. They're one's right next to the other, and they form sort of a group, right? And we make that sound sort of as a whole, right? We kind of produce these sounds almost concomitantly, almost at the same time. They're successive, but they're bunched together. It's a cluster, right? En français, on va dire un groupe, une agglomération de consonnes, right? So that means because these two sounds are so close together, what we're going to do is we're going to assimilate one sound with the other. Where instead of having the alveolar right, we're going to have our velar It's going to be a velarization of the right. And if you listen, we say wing, wink, right? We don't say wink. We don't say wink. Right, wink, and it'll be extremely unnatural. This happens pretty much spontaneously. Now, I think this is worth seeing because you have this ing, right, that gets tenser. You can feel it, right? You might mistakenly make that change the short value for it. You might go wink, but no, wink, right? So we maintain the short value, right, which is lax for I, right? And yet all of the sort of tensioning is concentrated on the velarized right? Okay, so it might seem sort of like gymnastics, right? But this is not something that comes naturally to especially speakers of Romance languages, right? Romance, for example, there's this short I sound, right? Is not in French. I, right? It isn't in Portuguese, or it isn't. These are not languages I speak, but this is something I'm at least just aware of. In Italian or Spanish, right? There's going to be the E sound is going to be more prevalent. So just to say, you don't want to say wink, you want to say wink, wink. And there's sort of like a tensioning at the end, which can be assimilated to a diphthong. Of course, it's not at all a diphthong, but there is that same kind of movement, wink, right? You kind of get tense at the end, right? Because we have a consonant cluster, right, of that velarized N followed by the K. And that's what we call a phonetic, you don't have to know this, but this is referred to as a phonetic assimilation, right? And think about it being sort of the principle of economy, right? If you can do something in an easier way with less expenditure of muscle energy in your mouth, you're going to do it, right? So it's an economic way to make sound, right? It's a shortcut. That's what I should have said instead of obeying the principle of economy. That's what a shortcut is. So wink, right? Likewise, here we have a g, which is the other velar plosive consonant, right? If we have N preceding the G, we're going to have the same velarization, therefore, right? Wing. But notice what happens here, right, is that we don't even pronounce the g, right? We say wink, right? but we say wing, right? And in a sense, it makes sense. I'm sort of tempted to write a paper on this, but I don't know. But it's important to sort of understand why. So we've just seen, and this is, if you can kind of go through this, these sounds will make a little more sense. We've just seen that the velarized N only occurs, right? It will only occur before a k or a g, right? That is the only situation where we will encounter this sound, right? We never see it otherwise, right? So your brain is always sort of looking out for these kind of things. After a while, as you learn a language, and this is what's amazing that when you're 3 years old, you can pick this stuff up. You end up figuring something out with this sound, right? Or as you acquire language, you end up figuring it out. Every time you hear the ing, you go, ooh, I know what's happening. I hear the ing, automatically there's either going to be a k or a g afterwards, right? It's the only otherwise we would not have this ing sound, right? Okay, so if we don't hear a k, right? Okay, the brain sort of anticipates, so the brain sort of imagines it hears the g, because the brain sort of operates on this sort of binary level. The brain sort of furnishes the sound, and this is sort of interesting with the psycholinguist people saying, oh, that's amazing, you actually think you hear the g, but we don't say it, right? So that is why we say wing, and if you really listen to that, wing, we don't say wing, right? Wing, it's a silent G, but you think you hear it, right? Because we have the ing is either followed by k, g. If you don't hear k, you sort of furnish in your mind that g. That is why it is sort of a successful silent G, right? No one notices it. No English speaker, unless you have to teach phonetics, you just don't know it because you just think you're saying the g, but wing, right? You don't say it. So that is what we discussed. Well, I went a little bit farther, but that is what's discussed on page 24. There's a little bit more to say, and yes, we might as well do that too. We might as well do this as thoroughly as we can. It's pretty interesting stuff. This is sort of what phonetics does. It sort of treats sounds as a system, and as I said, it's the first development of structural linguistics, and now it kind of makes sense. Actually, phonology, I should be more specific, is the first development of structural linguistics. We just look at sounds as a system and see they work together, and it makes sense. So there's another little kind of detail, and this is kind of clever. Notice we're talking about, when we look at, we looked at, well, I forget where we just looked at. We looked at sort of wing, I think, right? Yeah, we looked at wing. And we noticed that we're talking about a final G, right? We're looking at a final G. And the G's are only, typically, I say typically, we're going to look at an exception. The G's are only silent when we're talking about a final, the last letter in the word, right? So I'm looking at wing, right? That's the G, that's a final G, it's going to be silent. I'm not going to go through that explanation we just had, right? But notice if I have a word like mon doigt, all right? Mon doigt, we're going to say finger. Ah, okay. You can hear the g. Wing, silent. Finger, g. You can hear that guttural, right? It's that guttural sound, that velar plosive, right? That is voiced. So we'll write it like this. We still have the velarization, right? Fing, but we also have that g. Right? We have that sort of cacophonous g. And if you ever study poetry, it's really good to be aware of velars. You can say that they mean something. Usually when things are clangorous, right? When you read the verse by Ezra Pound, I mate with my free kind upon the crags. There's like K and G's go together. It's good to be able to say that goes with this sort of clangorous, often sort of cacophonous feel. So here we have like wing and then finger. Notice we're doing the British one. I don't say it like this, but I was British finger, right, finger. Notice we're doing received pronunciation, British transcription. So we're going to write this schwa. There's a silent R there. You're aware of this, right? Finger, right? Okay. So you can hear that because this is not a final G. But there is an exception. I think we might go into too much detail. I am sorry to do this. Sorry to get you into so much trouble here, but it makes sense, and we're kind of pushing you farther with this. There's one last thing to see. So what have we said? We said yes. Okay, if we have a G after an N, if it's a final G, right? Okay, it's going to be silent, right? In either case, whenever we have an N before a G that is silent or not, it's always going to be velarized. No problem, right? Okay. So that is sort of the way things usually work. But sometimes, right, and now we have to look at morphology, because sometimes words have parts. Sometimes it doesn't work that way when we have an ing in the middle of a word, right? Usually we're going to hear the g, right? Okay? Because that's the way it usually works in the middle of a word. But sometimes it's not. For example, if we have, I said finger, right? G, you can hear it. But here we can say, for example, un chanteur. Here we can say like sing, right? Notice, and that's just going to be like wing, right? We have the short I followed by the ing, sing, right? Okay. And now, if we want to say someone who sings, right, we're going to have a singer. And you'll notice there's a difference that we have finger, in British, what, finger, but singer, finger. So we say the g for finger, right? But we say that we don't have that g for singer. And it actually makes sense, because if we ask ourselves what a finger is, I don't say a finger is someone who fings, right? Okay? That's to say that that's a word, and we can say that there's only one morpheme in that word. That means there's only one part of that word that has meaning, right? A morpheme is what we call a minimal unit of meaning, right? There's no parts of that word that mean anything. We're not talking about doesn't mean anything and fing doesn't mean anything, right? So there's only one morpheme. There's no morpheme boundary, right? Whereas with singer, right, we can say that morphologically, right, this word, when I say morphologically, we're just talking about the sort of the structure of the word, right? We can say, ooh, this word actually has two morphemes. Sing means something, right? That's sort of the lexical verb, right? And here we're going to have it's going to be, as you're all aware, it's going to be our neutral suffix, because we said we have what we call transparent derivation, right? And if we remember, with transparent derivation, they don't change the pronunciation, right? So because of that, because we have a morpheme boundary, that means that that's sort of the end of a unit of meaning, right? That this morpheme is going to be assimilated with a word, or the morpheme boundary, right? The end of one morpheme will be assimilated with the end of one word, which means this G will be silent as if it was the end of a word. That's sort of the subtlety. Now, I hope you followed me there. I think that's one of the most complicated we've done in this class, and we're ending on that, ending on this sort of intricate note. But this is explained in 24. I've gone into some detail because I think it's kind of easier if you have a little bit of the baggage to sort of make sense of it. If you kind of weed through this, once you understand it, I think it gets once you understand it once, and if you understand it well, you don't really have to memorize it. You sort of see how it functions and it makes sense, right? So I hope that works for you. So you can look at those exercises and notice this is great. You can actually practice with those transcriptions. But that will be all for the material that you're responsible for. Once again, there's going to be you can refer yourself to the video that I've also included this week about. Which is really a discussion on what you're supposed to study for the test. So best of luck for the end of your semester, and I hope you are all in good health. Take care.